Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin Daf Tetzayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Shifra Adik for the Refuah Shlema of Tzvi Dov Ben Sarah. Okay, we're going to two quick announcements. Gila Fine's class is going to be starting on Sunday. So if you haven't yet registered, please register. And it's going to be really an interesting class on methodology of how to learn Talmudic stories. All the sources are in English. So if your Hebrew isn't good, don't be intimidated. There's going to be two or a bit more lecture classes with participation of some participation. I would say the last year will be much more participation, and the middle year will be chavruta learning. Of course, it's open to both men and women, so we encourage you all to join. The middle class will be mostly chavruta, and the other classes will not be chavruta. But like I said, the last one will be a little bit more participation, and the first one will be a bit more lecture to kind of set the groundwork for the ability to then do the chavruta in the second class. So it's all digital. So if you miss the class, you can always make it up. It's starting on Sunday. This week, it will be for the next 3 Sundays. And later today, Alana Stein-Hin's Shiur will go up Din and Daf. It's about Tumahu Travet Zibor that we talked about on Daf Yud Bet. And as Alana said, it was too hard not to talk about that being Hanukkah and with the impure oil. And anyway, it's a very relevant topic, the Tumah Hutra B'tzibor and Dechuya B'tzibor. It's all very interesting relating to Hanukkah as well. So that will go up later today. Okay, getting to our daf now. Our main topic for today is going to be all the things that are ruled in a court of 71, the Sanhedrin Hagdolah, as we call it, the Great Sanhedrin. They dealt with certain particular issues. We're going to go through one by one. What we're going to do for each issue is what is the derivation for this issue? And then with some of them, we're going to go off a little bit on some other details relating to that law. So Ein Danim, the first one is actually more confusing because the first one is a shevet, and we don't even know what that means. And we already suggested 2 suggestions yesterday that we rejected, which is it can't be a shevet, a tribe that all does some sin of, like not keeping Shabbat, which they would get the death penalty, because we're obviously looking for something where there's a differentiation between a community doing something and an individual doing something. Because if they do it as a community, they have to go to a court of 71, and therefore we assume their punishment must be different as well. And there is no such different punishment if the whole community is Mechalel Shabbat, desecrates the Sabbath, versus an individual. Same thing with Ir Nidachat. Even though you would think Ir Nidachat, there's different laws. Okay, the death penalty is different, for example, for the people in the Ir Nidachat, besides that the whole city gets burned. Individual who worships idols gets stoned. If the city, the Ir Nidachat does it, they don't get stoned. I actually forget. I think it's Chenek, but I forget. We're going to get to it later. Maybe it says it here in Rashi. B'saif. Okay, sorry. It's B'saif. They get killed by the sword, which is a much lighter, still capital punishment, but it's a lighter capital punishment. So there you would think, oh, that might be it because the ruling is different. That's why everything is different. It's in front of 71 and the punishment is different. But we ended the daf with saying yesterday that it's the criteria for Ir Nidachat, either Rabbi Yonasan or Rabbi Yoshi, I would disagree with this, don't fit with a whole tribe because it's either 1 to 100 people, 10 to 100 people, and 100 people you max out. It's not Ir Nidachat anymore, or it's the majority of a tribe, but not the whole tribe. So those 2 get rejected. Now we're going to have 3 possible answers. Okay, the way it's going to work is we're going to have 1, then 2. We're going to reject 2. And then we're going to go to 3, but 3 is going to actually reinstate one of the ones we already rejected. So Amar Rav Matna, last 4 words of Tet Vav Amud Bet. Well, the Gemara was struggling with there is no case where the community as a whole gets a different punishment, to which they say, okay, it must be a different person. It's a person, not a community. It's a unique individual. And we'll see in a minute why. It's not a different punishment, but why does he get ruled in Shivim Lecha? Well, he's the Nasi of the Shevet. When it says Loat HaShevet, it doesn't mean the whole tribe. It means the head of the tribe. Now, the head of the tribe will have to go to a court of 71. Why is that? Milo Amal, did he not say, who not say, Amar Rav Ada bar Matna, did Amar Rav Ada bar Ava, Kol hadavar gadol yaviu elecha. This is by Moshe. We're going to go back to this pasuk a few times today. Yitro tells Moshe, any big thing that people should bring to you. And how do we darshan that? Dvarav shel gadol, not big issues, but issues of somebody big, somebody prominent. So that would explain, and Hainami gadolhu, this person, Nasi Shevet is obviously a prominent leader, and therefore any issue that the Nasi has, now it would have to be an issue. Rashi adds this, and it's obvious, and we're going to see it later when we talk about the Kohen Gadol. It would obviously be a capital crime that the Nasi did, where he would get capital punishment. Then we're going to judge him in a court of 71, and that's a possibility for how to understand Lo Tashevet. Lo Tashevet means the head of a tribe, one person only, not the whole tribe sins. Second option, Ulla Amar Rabbi Elazar b'ba'in al isken achalot. If we have an issue relating to land distribution, this tribe says that's our land. Here's the border, right? You can imagine there must have been a lot of arguments about this between tribes. So if we have two tribes arguing over the borders, which land belongs to who, we're going to bring that in front of the big court. Why is that? Well, we're going to learn it Eretz Israel, just like when we got into the land, we conquered the land. How did they divide the land? Just like there, they did it in front of 71. That's who did it. It was Yoshua and Elazar, a Kohen, and all this, right? Those Kenim. So Afkan Shivim Ve'echad, right? They didn't have a Sanhedrin then, but they had something like a Sanhedrin. So also here, the Gemara says that's a bad comparison, because if you're going to take that comparison, you have to take it all the way. You have to say that the same way, if you're going to say the same way they went into the land, they handled the Nachalah, that's how they handle it now. Well, it's not true. Because in the beginning, they used this lottery system. Urim v'tumim, they also used the Urim v'tumim, where they consulted with, it was this sort of magical thing that would answer questions, right? As if like we're getting an answer from God. V'chol Yisrael, and it was done in front of all of the Jewish people. So if that's the case, Afkan, that's what you would need here if you're going to learn the whole thing from how they distributed the Nachalah. Well, then you would have to say it's not just has to be done in the Sanhedrin Gedolah. You would need the Kalpi. Afkan, Kalpi, Urim v'tumim v'chol Yisrael, and nobody thinks that we do that. So that's a bad comparison. We're not going to learn it from there. And Rav Matna. So we're going to go back to the first explanation, which is the Nasi Shevet. It's the head of the tribe. So those are two possible answers, but we rejected answer number 2. Now we get to the third answer. And like I said, we're going to go back and reinstate one of the previous ones. Ravina Amar Lo'olam b'shevet shehudach. We're actually talking about an entire tribe that worships Avodah Zarah. Now, what was the problem? Well, udekakashelach. Now, you asked the question before, and you said b'dina derived daininam, right? But they're not judged like an irani dachat. So why would we treat them differently than individuals who worshipped Avodah Zarah? Well, it's actually true that we're going to treat them as a group differently, but in what way? Not completely differently. Even though they get the death penalty, stoning like an individual, Beidina de Rabin Daininale. We're going to split it. We're going to say they still get the severe punishment of an individual. And now you can see why an irani dachat maxes out at a certain point, because if too many people do it, we're not going to. An irani dachat, on the one hand, is a big chumrah because we're going to burn a whole city. On the other hand, all the individuals who worshiped idols are actually going to get a less severe punishment. So now if we go so far, and it's the entire tribe, they're actually going to get the harsher punishment as if they're individuals. So you're right. There is no difference with them in terms of that. But what's the one difference? They are going to be ruled, though, because it's a whole tribe, we're going to judge them in the Great Sanhedrin. And therefore, they're going to be. So that's how we're going to explain it. So the Shevet is a whole tribe that worships idols. Their law is not different. They still get stoned. However, we have to do it in front of a court of 71. And now, where do we get this from? So now you're going to see where they get it from. And we're going to return to this drasha a few times. There's a few drashot today, like the Gadol, we're going to go back to a few times. We're going to go back also to this later. Milo Amar Rabbi Chama Rabbi Yossi Amar Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Oshaya. By the way, this introduced in the same way. Did he not say Milo Amal? Did this person not say V'hotzeta et haishahu o et haishahi? Here we have psukim which talk about an idol worshiper. If somebody, an individual worships idols, we're in Dvarim Yud Zayin Hey. The end of that pasuk is they get stoned. Okay, what do you do with this person? Well, it says, I'm going to read just some of the words. You take them el sha'arecha. You take them to your gates. What does your gates mean? Your gates means your city court. What's your city court? The court of 23. So it says, if a person, basically the gist of this pasuk is, and the wording actually says this very clearly, if an individual worships idols, they're going to get stoned, which is the end of the pasuk, and they're going to do it in Sha'arecha, by a court of 23. Now, What are we going to darshan from this? What does Rabbi Chama Rabbi Yossi say in the name of Rabbi Yoshaya? Ish v'isha atamotzi l'sharecha. Who goes out to the court in the city? Just an ish or isha, just an individual. But you don't take out a whole city to the 23 court. By the way, where does Ir Nidachat go? What's a whole city? A city is in Ir Nidachat. They're judged in 71. We're going to get to that soon. Hachanami, well, just like the whole city is not like an individual and won't get judged in the court of 23, but 71. Well, now we're going to say, okay, now I want to be clear here. Rabbi Chama said in the name of Rabbi Yossi that this pasuk was coming to exclude the Ir Hanidachat, the city. But for that same token, what we can say by that, in that same way, we can say also it's obviously going to exclude because it's an individual only goes to the court of 23. But if it's an entire tribe, we're going to obviously judge them in Shivim Bechad. And therefore we end up with city or tribe, complete tribe, which is not an Ir Nidachat. And the punishment to the individuals in that entire tribe, each person's going to get the harsher punishment of skila. They're not judged like an Ir Nidachat. However, if the entire tribe worships idols, we are going to bring them to a court of 71, and that's derived from this pasuk about the individuals go to the sharecha, but not a whole tribe. Okay, lo et navi hasheker, not a false prophet. Now, where are we going to get that a false prophet gets judged? And that's not is, if you remember, the whole language of the Mishnah was not in this except for 71, which means this is just part of the list. A navi sheker gets ruled in a court of 71. Where do we get this from? This is going to be a little bit complicated. You'll see why. It's not so hard to follow, but there's something very complicated here that you'll hear in a minute. We're going to learn from a gezeira shava of the word yazid and yazid, which appear, okay, hazadah is the root, okay, which is to do something intentional, which appears both in Navi Sheker and appears in Zakeh Mamre. Let's talk about a Zakeh Mamre. A Zakeh Mamre is a rebellious elder. It's a person who basically teaches something, rules on something, and then the court says, you're wrong, we disagree with you, right? So let's say he's in a court of 3, and he says something, and the other 2 say something else, and then he goes and teaches according to his ruling. Okay, but what does he do? Then they take him, they say, you're wrong, and they take him to the higher court until they get to the Sanhedrin Agdolah. If the Sanhedrin Agdolah, and here's the important part, if this is only going to happen, if the Great Sanhedrin says, he comes before them, he says, this is what I learned, this is my tradition, this is what I think, and they say, we disagree with you, and then the rebellious elder goes out and teaches against what the high court told him, well, then he gets killed. But if he goes against what a smaller court told him, he doesn't get killed. So that's the important point. Now, I just want to point out, this is the confusing part. The Zakeh Mamre is ruled in a court of 23. He's not ruled in a court of 71. In other words, if after defying the ruling of the Great Sanhedrin, the rebellious elder goes out and teaches in his town or wherever, goes back home, teaches against what the court told him, then the rebellious elder is killed. But where did they bring him to be killed? In a court of 23. And this is why it's a little confusing. Because we're learning from the act of rebellion of the Zakeh Mamre. The Zakeh Mamre will only be killed if he goes against the court of 71. From there, we're going to learn that Navi Sheker gets judged in a court of 71. Even though the Zakeh Mamre himself does not get ruled in a court, doesn't get judged in a court of 71. That's why it's a little confusing. And you'll see, it's very important to understand this because the Gemara is going to also kind of question that and push the limits here. So let's start from the beginning. Hazadah, Atya Hazadah, Zadah Mizakeh Mamre. So Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina says, we have Hazadah, okay? Now, here are the psukim. Hanavi asher yazid ledaver davar b'shmi. Notice there's the word yazid and there's the word davar. We're going to come back to these 2 words. Right now we're on the yazid. A navi who's yazid, who intentionally claims, right, they have a prophecy from God and it's not true. Umeta naviyahu. Okay, that navi is going to die. That's Dvarim 18:20. Now, in Dvarim 17:12, it says in the Zakeh Mamre, Ha'ish asher ya'aseh b'zadon, person intentionally, libilti shmo ala kohen, he doesn't listen to the kohen, ha'omed l'sharei sham et Hashem Elokecha, o ala shofet, he doesn't listen to the kohen or the shofet, which they understand to mean the Great Sanhedrin. Umei ta'ishahu, that person will be killed, ubi'arta rami Yisrael. Okay, and we will uproot evil from the world. Now, what do you see here? They get killed, okay, for going against the shofet and the kohen. Now, it's known that it's only if he goes against the shofet that's in, right, the Sanhedrin. That's learned from somewhere else. Okay, 71. So since it says Hazadah there and it says Hazadah there, we're going to learn from one to the other. So just like Mala Halam b'shivim be'echad, that the Zakei Mamre has to defy a ruling of the 71 in order to eventually get killed by a court of 23, side point. Likewise, because the use of the word Hazadah has to do with the 71, also the Navi Sheker is going to be in a court of 71, will be judged in a court of 71. But then they say, how can you learn it from that pasuk? That pasuk where it says he intentionally goes against what the court says, ends with, and then he gets killed. So that means that pasuk is really talking about if he gets killed in a court of 23, which is known to everybody, he's not listed in the Mishnah as being judged in a court of 71. So the focus of that pasuk is really the death of this person, which is done in a court of 23. So if you're going to learn from Hazadah, you would actually get to 23, not to 71. So Ela Amarish Lakish, Gamar Davar Mehamrato. Okay, forget the gezeira shava Hazadah. We're going to do a different gezeira shava, Davar. By the Navi Sheker, I pointed out already, it said in that same pasuk, Asher Yazid l'daber davar b'shmi. He speaks some word of God, right? A word in the name of God, which is really not in the name of God. He made it up. And in a different pasuk earlier, 2 pasukim before, where it talks more about what the Zakei Mamre does when he goes against the ruling of the court, it says, "Va'asita al pi hadavar asher yagidu lecha min hamakom hahu." By the way, that's where they get that it's the Sanhedrin Agdola, because it says from this place of the Torah always means from the temple, which is where the Sanhedrin Agdola sat. And it says there, you should do according to what they say in the Sanhedrin Agdola. Now, there the word davar appears, and there clearly the context is the 71 that say something that goes against what the Zakei Mamre says, and only if he defies the 71 will he eventually get killed. So that pasuk is really talking all about the 71. It's talking about the hamra'ah, the rebellion, and not talking about the the fact that he gets killed, which would be 23. So that's a better drasha. Okay, and that's what Rish Lakish answers. But then the Gemara says, right, so Gamar daval me hamra'ato, where there it really talks about hamra'ah as his rebellion. Then the Gemara says, okay, wait. So if you let's start from here. Davar. We start with Zakei Mamre rebels against 71. That's clear from that pasuk, because he does it in the makom where the Sanhedrin Agdola sits. From there, we learn to the Navi Sheker. Navi Sheker is ruled in a court of 71. Now, we also have a gezeira shava Hazadah. So now why don't we reverse it back and say, well, since the Navi Sheker is ruled in a court of 71, and in the pasuk about his death, it says Yazid, and in the pasuk about the death of the Zakei Mamre, it also says Yazid, why don't we then say, Ligmar Hazadah Zadami Navi Sheker, and then come to the conclusion that a Zakei Mamre should be ruled in a court of 71. Now, we know that's not the case, but logic would state, if you have a gezeira shava of davar, you learn one from to the other, and then Hazadah teaches it back. It's almost like a boomerang, right? And then it goes back and will teach to the Zakei Mamre. And why is the Zakei Mamre then not ruled in a court of 71 based on the gezeira shava of Hazadah? So the simple answer is, if you remember gezeirot shavot, you can only teach gezeira shava if you have a tradition about it. So to which they answer, davar gamir, Hazadah lo gamir. We have a tradition that there's a gezeira shava from davar, which would teach from Zakei Mamre to Navi Sheker 71, but we don't have a gezeira shava Hazadah, and therefore we don't learn that the death of the ruling against the Zakei Mamre in the end to kill the Zakei Mamre is done in a court of 71. No, we don't have a gezeira shava like that, and therefore it's ruled in a court of 23. Right? In the absence of any drasha, well, it's going to be the default is 23 because it's just a capital crime. Okay, so that was a little confusing because the Zakei Mamre has two elements to it. Again, one is, you could call it stage 1 and stage 2. Okay, stage 1 it's really not stage 1, it's like a farther stage in the Zakei Mamre. But if we're comparing these two stages, stage 1 is when the elder is ruled against that you're wrong about what you're saying. Then after that, the Zakei Mamre goes and rules and teaches the way he thinks against, right? That's the rebellious act. He rebels against the 71. But in the end, his judgment is only in a court of 23. We don't have to in order to say you're liable the death penalty for what you did, 23 is sufficient. Lo et Kohen Gadol. Okay, now we're going to go back to a drasha we saw before, which was quoted in the name of Ra'ad or Ahava, right at the beginning of our daf about the Nasi Shevet. Same thing we're going to say for the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol who does a capital crime is going to be ruled in a court of 71. Minani Mile, where do we get this from? Amar Rav Adabar Ava, Da'amar Kra, Kola Davar Gadol Yaviu Elecha. What does it mean? Any big thing they're going to bring to you. It doesn't mean any big thing. It means Divarav Shel Gadol. It means any issue relating to a big prominent person. Kohen Gadol will fall into that category. Now the Gemara says Meitive, but wait. And we're going to read two psukim, and I'll already tell you the context. In this section where Yitro suggests to Moshe to do the court system the way he suggests this whole setup of court system to make Moshe's life easier. It first explains what Yitro says Moshe should do, and then it says Moshe did it. So in the description where Yitro tells Moshe what to do, it says, V'shaftu ta'am b'chol eit, these people will judge the people all the time. V'haya kol hadavar gadol yaviu elecha, and only the big things will come to you, and kol hadavar katan, the small things will go, the yishpatu haim. They'll deal with it, and this will make your life much easier. Then a few psukim later, it says that Moshe actually does what Yitro says, and instead of saying davar gadol there, though, it says v'shaftu ta'am b'chol eit. Okay, so those people he put in place judge the people all the time. And then, et hadavar hakashe yiviuno Moshe. The difficult issues will be brought to Moshe. It doesn't say gadol there. So now we're going to have two ways to explain why it switches from gadol to kashe. Okay, and we're going to have two opposite approaches. So right now we said the Kohen Gadol, because kol davar gadol means dvarav shel gadol, not a davar gadol, not a difficult thing or a big issue, but an issue of a prominent person. Meitive, but this contradicts what Rav Adabar Ava said is contradicted by the following braita. Davar gadol is davar kashe. Okay, davar gadol means davar kashe. So this is a classic structure of a midrash halacha, where first it states something and then it's going to question it. Davar kashe, shel gadol. Why are you assuming it means a difficult thing? Maybe it means something of a prominent person, an issue relating to a prominent person. So they say, well, because in the later pasuk it says they brought the difficult things to Moshe. Hare davar kashe amor. That explains the previous pasuk. Since it says kashe here and it's a gadol there, it must mean kashe is coming to define what is gadol. Gadol is kashe. Okay, now in a second, we're going to have the actual opposite way of reading it, which you might have already be thinking. So now, to answer the question, they say, oh, don't worry about that. Rav Adabar Ava goes against that braita because Rav Adabar Ava relies on a different braita that says the exact opposite. Hu da Amar ki Tana, he holds like the following Tana. Ditanya, as it says in the following braita, davar gadol, dvarav shel gadol. Okay, this is going to start with the opposite presumption, that the assumption is dvar gadol means dvarav of a gadol, like the Kohen Gadol. And then the Midrash Halacha is going to ask, maybe it means a difficult thing. Which they answer, it already says davar kashe later. In other words, davar kashe must be davar kashe. If they wanted to say davar kashe up top, they would have said davar kashe. The fact that they say davar gadol must mean that davar gadol means for shel gadol. Okay, you follow? One is saying that the fact that they got more specific and said davar kashe was defining davar gadol that was said earlier. The other one says no. Davar kashe is coming to say there's davar gadol, there's davar kashe. Those are two different things. Otherwise, why would you use different words if not to say two different things? So hamani came davar gadol, davar shel gadol. So now we're going to have a little bit of a back and forth here. Hi Tana trei krai lamali. So if you say the first Tana that said davar gadol and davar kashe mean the same thing, why do you need to say it twice if it's the same thing? If they each mean different things, it makes sense why they said it twice. One is saying davar gadol and one is saying davar kashe, and those are two different things. But if you say they mean the same thing, why repeat them? Well, as I already set this up for you, one was the commandment to do this. Yitro said, this is what you should do. And then the second one was what we call the bitzua, when Moshe actually did it. So that's why it's repeated. There's no, right? This isn't a problem. So then, okay, idach, that's actually a good proof. So how can the other opinions say these mean two different things? If one is just coming to really repeat the other and say this is what Moshe actually did. Well, they say, Im kain lichtov o gadol gadol, o kashe kashe. My gadol, my kashe, shma mina tarte. If all you were doing was saying, this is what Yitro suggested, this is what Moshe did, then you should have either said gadol at the top and gadol at the bottom, or katan or kashe at the top, kashe at the bottom. Why switch words? So switching wording came to actually say that these are two different things. Okay, so it was a way of getting to two different things, even though really it was repeated because one was the actual fulfillment of the command, but it was repeated in a different way to teach you that they're two different things. So we have two approaches here, whether davar gadol means davar av gadol or davar gadol means davar kashem. Our Mishnah obviously follows it means davar av gadol because otherwise the Kohen Gadol wouldn't be ruled in a court of 71. Now we're ready on the Kohen Gadol topic by Rabbi Elazar. He asked the following question, which we're not going to have an answer to. Shorosh Kohen Gadol bekam. We already learned yesterday that the shur who gets killed, if a shur of a Kohen Gadol, let's say, kills a person, so the shur gets killed, and that's in a court of 23. But since it's the shur of the Kohen Gadol, capital crime, not of the Kohen himself, but of his property, that's a good question. Do we put that in a court of 23, or is that like an issue of the Kohen Gadol himself? And here are the two sides. Now the pasuk said there, the shur is killed and the owner is killed. Now, if the owner was being killed, the Kohen Gadol really being killed, and we compare it, then he would be in a court of 71. So maybe the shur should be in a court of 71. Is it like the Baalim, his own Baalim? Oh, or are they just saying it's just like an owner should get killed, but not necessarily that pasuk is comparing the shor and his kal to its particular owner, but to owners in general who just get killed in a court of 23. So there's no answer to this question. However, Abai does infer something from this question. He's only asking about the shor who gets killed, but he's not asking about if the Kohen Gadol gets into a fight with his neighbor and they go to court. Obviously, that's done in a court of 3. That's what Abai is saying. What he's saying is the inference from this question is he's only asking about a shor that gets killed because of this comparison to Gambal Avumat. But if it's regular Dine Mamonot, then, there's a loan out, something, it'll go to a court of 3, like anyone else. To which the Gemara says, Pshita, why are you even pointing this out, Abai? It's quite obvious. Nobody would think that if Kohen Gadol gets into a fight with his neighbor, we're going to bring it to the court of 71. Well, they say you might have thought, because Ma'u detemahu il uchtav kol hadavar hagadol, kol dvarav shel gadol, kamash malan. You might have thought that maybe kol hadavar gadol means not only dvarim shel gadol, but not only the big things of a gadol, but maybe anything of a gadol. To which they say, kamash malan, no. The small petty things, those don't go to the court of 71. We don't bother them to deal with that, even if it relates to the Kohen Gadol. Ein motzi'in. Now we go to the next one, Milchemet HaReshut. We want to go out to optional war. Here we're going to have 2 attempts. The first attempt we're going to reject, and then the second one we will learn it from. Minani mili, where do we get it from? Amar Rabbi Abaud, Amar Kha. V'lifnei Elazar Kohen Yamod. Okay, this is the Psukim in Sefer Bamidbar, Kaf Zayin, Kaf Aleph, right, 27-21, where it says that what should you do when you go out to war? Before Elazar Kohen Yamod, go before the Kohen, Sha'alo b'mishpat ha'urim lifnei Hashem, he'll ask the Urim v'Tumim, we're going to talk about those a bit today. We saw them in the beginning of the daf. Lifnei Hashem, before God, al piv yetzu v'al piv yavo. Based on his word, will you go out to war? Now here are the key words in the pasuk. Hu v'chol b'nei Yisrael ito v'chol eida. He, which we're going to see who this refers to, all of Israel with him and the whole community. Okay, what are these words? So the Gemara is going to darshan them. Who's the melech? This is the king, which in those days was Yoshua. They were trying to Yoshua. He was the one about to go out to war. V'chol b'nei Yisrael ito ze meshuach milchama. Interesting, that's not all of the Jewish people. It means the Kohen who's in charge of the meshuach milchama is the one who was anointed to be in charge of the war. V'chol ha'ida ze Sanhedrin. And chol ha'ida must be the Sanhedrin. There you have it. The Sanhedrin is involved in the decision to go out to war. Maybe this pasuk is just telling you who are the options of people who can use the Urim v'Tumim, and not necessarily that they're the ones who have to be consulted. It could be these, right? Go to Elazar, he'll deal with the Urim v'Tumim, or who maybe the king can, or the what was the second one? The Meshuach Milchama, or the Sanhedrin, and maybe it doesn't mean you have to consult with them, so that's not a good answer. This is going to take a little while. We're going to get into a drasha about David HaMelech, and then we're going to try to figure out how they get to this drasha. Okay? David had a harp on top of his bed, Kevan shigia chatzot laila, as soon as it would get to midnight, ruach tzfonit min hashevebo, this northern wind would come at midnight, start playing the music, kayam and agay me'elav. It would start playing by itself. Sounds like chimes kind of thing. Okay? Miyad hayat David omed osek b'Torah ad shalamud hashachar. So David would wake up every night at midnight and start learning Torah, and then he'd be ready at when the sun would start to rise. He'd already be up, obviously. Kevan shalamud hashachar nechnesu chachmei Yisrael etzlo. And then at Amud hashachar, everyone else would wake up, because we'll see later, they woke up from the light coming in their rooms. That would wake them up, and they would all go to David to start with the day's issues, and start consulting. So now one day, there's missing the word one day, but this would have to be one day. This wasn't every day. Amrulo, Adonenu Amelech, or it could be several times, but it certainly wasn't every day. They said to him, Adonenu Amelech, our king. They said, Amcha Yisrael truchim leparnasah. The people need sustenance. Help us. Well, Amar lahen l'chu itparnasu ze mizeh. He says, let them support each other, right? We have enough within us to one should support the other. Well, Amrulo, ein hakometz maspia et ha'ari ve'ein habor mitmaleh michuyato. They said to him, listen, a handful of stuff doesn't feed the lion, right? They're basically saying we don't have enough, even within our nation, to get around to everybody. And the bore doesn't have enough to fill up just in and of itself from the rainwater. In other words, there's not enough water and food to get around. We can't do it. We can't just support ourselves. Amar lahem l'chu pishtu yidechem bagdud. So go out and fight. Go conquer land. You'll have people there. You'll get more land. We'll be able to make it, and support ourselves. So now, did they just go out to go out to war based on what David said? Well, right. Remember, David actually expanded the borders of Israel. It makes sense that they're telling the story about him. Miyad yoatzim ba'achitofel. So first, they took advice with Achitofel. In a minute, we're going to see where they get this from. Nimlachim Sanhedrin. They advised with the Sanhedrin. It wasn't a Sanhedrin at the time, but whatever functioned like the Sanhedrin. Vishalim be'urim v'tumim. Again, back to the urim v'tumim. Amar Rav Yosef, Mikra. Where do we get this from? Turning out Amud Bet. B'acharei Achitofel b'neiyahu ben Yehoyada. This is a pasuk in Divrei Yamim. After Achitofel, b'neiyahu ben Yehoyada ve'Evyatar, who was the Kohen, and Sar Tzava Melech Yoav. Okay, and the head of the army was Yoav. Now, the way they're going to dart in this pasuk is like this. It's going to be in order. First Achitofel, then Bneiyahu ben Yehoyada, then Evyatar, and each one is going to represent something. And only then would the Sar Tzava Melech Yoav go out to war. Okay, we'd only go out to war after they went through all these people. So who are all these people representative of? Achitofel ze yoetz. He was the advisor. We know that because B'cheinu Omer ba'atzat Achitofel asher ya'atz. Right, it's famous. The atzat of Achitofel. We're not going to get into that now. But Bneiyahu ben Yehoyada zo Sanhedrin. He represents the Sanhedrin. Why? Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. They don't tell you. Evyatar elu urim v'tumim. That makes sense because he was the Kohen, which is usually the one who handled the urim v'tumim. B'cheinu Omer. Now we're going to get to Bneiyahu ben Yehoyada. This it says also in Chronicles in Divrei Yamim. U'Bneiyahu ben Yehoyada ala kreti v'ala pleti. Now the kreti v'pleti is known to be a representative of the courts. V'lamani kashman kreti u'pleti. Kreti shekortim divrehem. Why are they called kreti and pleti? Because kreti is they're definitive about their statements. They say very definitive things. That's the court. U'pleti shemufleim b'maasehem. Pleti is they're wondrous in their actions, which also is the court, right? They're very wise. They're very smart. So then that's the Sanhedrin, and only acharei, as I said before, achar kach sar tzava lemelech Yoav. Only then would they send Yoav into action. So there you see the Sanhedrin is involved in the decision. Okay, and they use David HaMelech as their example. From David, we learn that the Sanhedrin, and from, again, this pasuk, there was Bneiyahu ben Yehoyada, but he seems to represent the Sanhedrin, and therefore they would check with the Sanhedrin before going out to war, and therefore the Sanhedrin are the ones who decide to go out to an optional war. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak b'rei Rav Ada, v'amri la Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdumi, Mikra. Okay, some Rabbi Yitzchak, we're not sure which one, said the following. What's the pasuk from where we learn about the harp and this music that would happen that would wake up David HaMelech? Ura chvodi ura hanevel v'chinor ayira shachar. Okay, so wake me up, my glory, what would wake him up? The nevel and the chinor, he would wake up before the dawn. Whereas most people, the dawn wakes them up, and David HaMelech would wake up at dawn. This is a pasuk from Tehillim, and therefore connected to David HaMelech, because a lot of Tehillim, they connect with David HaMelech. He was the one who is attributed that he wrote a part of a lot of Sefer Tehillim. And therefore, they say this about David. Okay, back to our topic. Ein mosifin ala ir. The borders of Jerusalem and which areas are sanctified and which of the azarot, where's the azara go in terms of there's certain things that can be eaten in different areas. That's also decided by the Sanhedrin Agdolah. Again, Menane Mile, where do we get this from? So the next two are going to basically use the example of Moshe and say, just like Moshe did this, Moshe is reflective of the Sanhedrin. So Amar Rav Shimi Bar Chia Amar Kra Kechol Asher Ani Mar'eh Otcha Et Tavnit HaMishkan V'chein Ta'asu. So when Moshe sets up the Mishkan, God says, right, whatever I'm showing you, you should do. Like Moshe was the one kind of orchestrating all of it. And then it says V'chein Ta'asu, and such you should do. Now, V'chein Ta'asu there literally means this is what you should do. But they say V'chein Ta'asu, why Ta'asu? It's in plural. It means l'dorot habayim, in the future generation. So just like Moshe set up what are the sanctified spaces in the Mishkan, likewise in the future, it should be the representatives of Moshe, which is the Sanhedrin. Mativ Rava. Okay, Rava says, wait a minute. If you take this chen tasu literally, that whatever was done in the dedication of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, is reflective of what's supposed to be done in the future in the temple later, well, that's not true. Okay, Mativ Rava, kol kelim sha'asa Moshe. There's a big difference. When Moshe took these kelim and sanctified them to be used in the temple, mishichatan and mikadashtan, right? All the kelim they used in the temple were sanctified. They had special kedusha to them. How so? Well, Moshe poured this oil on them. It's called the shemen hamishcha, and he poured the oil on all of. You could see this in the Torah. He poured it on all the kelim. But mikam va'elach, but in the future, they didn't do that. Avodatan mechanachtan. It was by using them. The first time they used them, that caused them to be consecrated. So, amai, why would that be? Why don't we say v'chein tasu? This was what should be done in future generations. Shemen hamishcha. Well, shanei hatam damakra v'yimshachem v'kadesh otam. We're going to have a drasha, although we're going to have a few psukim, and we're going to have to work them all out together. It says there that Moshe did mishicha, he poured the oil on them, anointed them, vayikadesh otam, and sanctified them. Them means just them and not others. Otam b'mishicha v'lo l'dorot b'mishicha. And for future generations, it won't be with the shemen hamishcha. So which the Gemara says, why are you understanding otam that way? You could say, Ema, otam b'mishicha, u'lidorot b'mishicha b'avodah. Maybe it means these can only be sanctified with anointing. But in the future, you can either put the oil on them, or you can use them, and that will sanctify them. So Amar Papa, Amar Kra. Okay, so he says we'll have a different pasuk. Pasuk says, this is in the Levites when they talk about the things they're doing in Bamidbar, when they're carrying the different parts. It talks about the Levites, and it says, Asher yashartu bam bakodesh. They will serve them in sanctification, or in holiness. Hakatuv tila'am b'sherut. So they say the pasuk. Okay, this is it says, they'll take all the vessels that they will work with them. They will serve with them. So what do they say here? Because it says Bakodesh, how did they become Kodesh? By Sherut, by actually working with them. So there you see that it's by working with them and not by anointing. To which the Gemara says, okay, well then what do you need Otam for? El Otam Lamali. Well, if we already have this pasuk that says they're going to serve with them, and serving is what sanctifies them, then why do you need the pasuk otam to say only these by anointing, right? They're both saying the same thing. So again, we're going to say ilav otam havamina l'derot b'mishicha uba avodah. You might have thought you need both. If you said asher shatubam b'kodesh, you would say to use them, right, to sanctify them, you need to use them, but you also might need to anoint them. So therefore, by the anointing, it said only these and not any others, meaning that's how it explains those with sherut and those with anointing, and not in the future, it's not going to be part and part. So now they say, right, ilav otam, if it weren't for otam, havamina l'dorot b'mishicha uba avodah dehachti v'chein tasu. In other words, back to our original pasuk. You would have thought v'chein tasu, you do it the same way, meaning you need anointing, and you might need something additional like sherut, but you might need both. That's part of what we just said. But therefore, katav rachmana otam b'mishicha v'lo l'dorot b'mishicha. So we have otam to teach you only these are anointed, and we have l'sharet bam asher shatu bam to teach you the way they get sanctified is by using them. The first use sanctifies them, and that is why v'chein ta'asu, which applies for other things, doesn't apply here because there's unique psukim. But v'chein ta'asu would teach you again our main topic, which was the Azarot and Jerusalem are sanctified by the Sanhedrin, like they were sanctified by Moshe at the time. Another thing we're going to learn from Moshe, Ein Osim Sanhedraot. Who sets up the small courts of 23? Only the Beit Din Gadol. Minalan, Kedesh Kacham b'Moshe, De'okei Sanhedraot. Also, Moshe was the one who put up all the Sarei Elafim, Sarei Me'ot, right? All that. So Moshe b'mkom Shavim v'Chadkai. And again, he's representative of 71. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to get off on some easy stuff about the pasuk in the beginning of Parshat Shoftim. Starts like this, and we're going to darshan this whole pasuk. Shoftim v'shotrim, judges and policemen, or however you define exactly shotrim. Titen lecha b'chol sha'arecha, you should place in all your gates. Asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach, that God gives you. Lishvatecha, for your tribes. Okay, notice there's gates, there's tribes. V'shaftu etam mishpat tzedek, and they will rule the people in a just way. So the Gemara is going to, since we're talking about setting up courts, that we're now going to go on a tangent. Like I said, we're going to have where we learn everything from, and then we're going to get off on these tangents about some laws about them. Tanu Rabbanan, minayin shemamidim shoftim liYisrael. How do you know you have to have judges? Okay, Talmud Lomar, shoftim titein, because it says there's a mitzvah. There's actually a mitzvah in the Torah to set up judges. Makes sense. Hard to have society without judges, without policemen, right? Enforcing, you would call them law enforcement officials. Now, shotrim liYisrael minayin. How do you know you need law enforcement officials? Talmud Lomar, shotrim titein. Okay, doesn't say titein twice. Shoftim v'shotrim titein, but both of them, the word titein put, right, it relates to both. Shoftim l'chol shevet v'shevet minayin. How do you know you need judges in every tribe? Talmud Lomar, shoftim l'shvatecha, because it says shoftim in the beginning of the pasuk, and then it says set them up, right, for your tribes. It said in the pasuk, so it means for each tribe. Shoftim shotrim l'chol shevet v'shevet minayin. Talmud Lomar, shotrim l'shvatecha. So again, it says in that pasuk, set up shotrim, and it says set them up in your tribes. Obviously, you need them in your tribes also. Shoftim l'chol ir v'ir minayin. Talmud Lomar, shoftim l'sha'arecha. Again, they're going to say at the end of that pasuk, it says in your gates. What is your gates? Your cities. So you need to set them up. You need to set them up in your tribes, and you need room for each tribe, and you also need in your each city. Shotrim l'chol ir v'ir minayin. Also law enforcement officials. Talmud Lomar, shotrim l'sha'arecha. Rabbi Yehuda, there are two other laws. Rabbi Yehuda says, there has to be one in charge of all of them, which is the Sanhedrin Agdola. Where do you see that from? Shenemar titen lecha. It's singular form of the word. Put for you. That sounds like there's one in charge of all of them. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, lishvatecha v'shaftu. Now, if you look at the pasuk, it says, place these in your courts and in your tribes and in your gates. And it says in your b'chol sha'arecha, in your gates, and then it says lishvatecha, for your tribes. And then the next, like there's a comma there, and then it says, and they will judge your people. Shaftu eta'am. But often they do a drasha where they take two words that are juxtaposed, even though there's a comma in between them, as if there's no comma. Lishvatecha v'shaftu. So what do they learn from that? For your tribes, they will judge. So now, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, mitzvah b'shevet ladun et shivto. This is a very interesting law. If you have an issue with people in your tribe, your judges in your tribe have to judge it. Don't stick it as a responsibility of some other tribe. No, they have to be ruled in your tribe, and that's what they learn. Lishvatecha shaftu, they have to judge for their own tribes also. Okay, last topic for today. Ir hanidachat. Ein osim ir hanidachat. So this we already learned this drasha. How do we know ir hanidachat is judged in a court of 71? This is a whole city where the whole city worships idols. Minani milei amar Rabbi Chiya bar Yosef amar Rabbi Yoshai amar Kra v'otzeta et ha'isha et ha'isha hi. Remember, you take them out to the court in your city, right? Which is the 23. Ish v'isha tamotzi l'sharecha, but yet tamotzi kol ha'ir l'sharecha. Only if it's an individual, a man or a woman. But if it's a whole city, then you're going to have to go somewhere else. Where else would you go if not the court of 71? Now the Mishnah had said these other two laws, which we're going to delve into, and with that we'll finish for today. They don't go on the border towns. Why not? You can't take a border city and turn it into an ir nidachat. My time, because it says mikir becha, marachmanan, the pasuk about you have a city mikir becha from within the midst of you, not on the borders. Lo menasfal. Okay, we'll get back to this. It'll be our last line for today. We'll come back here in 2 minutes. Velo shalosh. You can make 1 or 2 cities ir nidachat. You can't make 3. Now it sounds like 3 cities right next to each other. But soon we're going to see not everybody thinks even that. They think even 3 cities not near each other could be a problem. We're going to have a few different opinions about this. So first they're going to say, where do we get this from? Dichtiv echad. Okay, this is the pasuk. It says, Ki tishma be'achat arecha, if you hear in one of your cities, we're going to darshan this word achat, and arecha, which is your cities, one of your cities, and then you hear that they worship idols. So achat means achat and not three. Aval osim achat u'shtayim, but you could do two. This would be strange. Why achat? Achat means one, not two. So dichtiv arecha. Why not two? Why could it be two? Because it says one of your cities. Cities is plural in that sentence, which means could be even two cities. Again, it's not the simple reading of the word. It's drasha. Tanu Rabbanan. So here's a braita about this. Achat velo shalosh. So one and not three. Now again, we're going to have this midrash halacha style. Ataomer achat velo shalosh. She said one but not two. One but not three. Oh, eno el achat velo shtayim. Maybe it's one and not two. Kashu omer arecha haresh shtayim amor. Okay, this is just explaining what we said before, just in more detail. When it says arecha, that sounds like two. Hamanim came achat. So what could the achat be then? Achat velo shalosh. Okay, and from there we get you could have one or two, but not three. But now we're going to have two opinions of Rav, and then we're going to get to a machloka Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. We're going to see it gets a little complicated here. Zimnin Amar Rav. Sometimes Rav would say, "Bebeitin echadu de'enosin habishnayim u'shlosha batedim osin." Let's say we have three cities next to each other, and one court decided, one court of 71. There is only one court of 71. Decided one or two of those cities near any dachat. Then they destroyed the city. Then the judges switch. We have a turnover. We have a new court of 71, and they want to make the third city. So according to Rav, when he sometimes would say this, Shnayim u'shlosha batei dinim could do it. Okay, you could have successive courts that make other cities into irani dachats, even if they're near each other, it sounds like, as long as it was a different court. The problem is with one court can't make three cities. Zimnin Amar Rab, but sometimes Rab said the opposite. Afilu b'shnayim u'shlosha batei dinim lo olam ein osin. You can't make three cities irani dachats, even if, right, it's a different court. My time of Rav, what's the reason for the second opinion of Rav? Mishum korcha, because we're worried about making a city into a bald city, right? We don't want to have too much desolate land, okay? There's different reasons why this could be a problem. Some answer it based on what we're going to see later at the end of the daf, which is we're worried about our enemies conquering us. If we have too much desolate land, it's going to give opportunities for where people aren't living for the enemies to come, and perhaps that's the issue. Now we're going to have this machloket Rish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan Amar Rish Lakish Loshanu Ela b'makom achat Avav Shnayim U'Shlosha Makomot Osim. This is only if they're adjacent to each other, but if they're spread out, it's not a problem, or in different areas. Rabbi Yochanan Amal Ein Osim Mishum Korcha. Even that we're worried about having too many cities desolate. You can't have three at all, even if they're not near each other. And here's a braita, Tanya Kavatei to Rabbi Yochanan, Ein osim shalosh ayarot menudachot be'eretz Yisrael, aval osim otam shtayim, kegon echad beYehuda ve'echad beGalil. You can't do three. You can do two, like one in Judea, one in the Galilee. And here comes a bigger chiddush, aval shtayim beYehuda u'shtayim beGalil ein osim. You can't even do two in the Judean area and two in the Galilean, or two in the Galilean area. You can't have two in one area. Okay, so forget, we thought two was okay. Now, two is not okay unless they're in different areas at all, according to Rabbi Yochanan. You don't even do one if it's near the border. My time, or what's the reason? And here comes the reason for the border, because the enemies will come in, right? Right near the border is the easiest place for the enemies to come in. Right? We know all about this. And therefore, right, unfortunately, we don't want desolate cities there because it just allows people to come in. Now, last question for today. But didn't we just learn it's because of the drasha from the pasuk? Mikerbecha, not because of this issue of the enemies. So they say, Rabbi Shimon, this must be Rabbi Shimon who said this, did Darish Tamid Kra, because he explains the reason behind the drashot. So yes, there's a drasha, but here's the reason for it. Okay, so those two things can work together if you're someone like Rabbi Shimon who's Darshim Tamid Kra. Not everybody likes Darshim Tamid Kra, whole issue in and of itself, but we'll end here. So what we did today was we talked about these topics of all the things that are down the court of 71, what the shevet is. We had a whole different opinions of what that means. The Navi Sheker, the Kohen Gadol. We had the going out to war, right? Each of these times we found what are the drashot that are associated with this, to add on sanctified spaces, to create a court system, and to do irani dachat. And we ended with some details about irani dachat. And from here, we're going to finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and the last day of Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah.